Welcome to ABA On Call. Join myself, Rick Kubina.
Behavior analysis is a science of behavior.
And Doug Kostewicz.
Focus on the individual, and you're going to see focus on behavior.
For thought-provoking conversation. Hey everybody, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we will tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over.
Hello friends and colleagues, and welcome to ABA On Call for another exciting episode with myself and my dynamic colleague, Dr. Doug Kostewicz. Doug, how the heck are you?
I'm doing well. You have the best introductions. I can't stop smiling.
I was working on that one.
I know.
We have a very interesting, thought-provoking, whatever else we want to put behind it topic today, and that is we're going to talk about ABA and conspiracy theories. Now, when you hear this, you might be thinking like, whoa, why are you talking about conspiracy theories? Well, number one, they're everywhere. Number two, they affect our discipline. And number three, we need to talk about them. So
Right.
Let's start off with, tell me, what the heck is a conspiracy theory?
So, to define, well, there are a few different definitions, but when you distill it down, it has some core components. And the first is there's a group. And it's not just any group, it's a group that has some type of influence that is doing something sort of in secret and then is responsible for some event. And when you try to distill things down, I think that's the lowest common denominator. It's a secret group that has influence that some event can be linked back to.
Okay, that is a well-stated example. And it fits many conspiracy theories, popular ones that are out there. You can start, or I can start. Give me an example of a conspiracy theory, and we'll see how it fits. I mean, there's so many of them out there.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the tried and true ones is landing on the moon. Right?
Yep.
So the theory is we didn't land on the moon, and it was simply something done in a TV studio. Now, when you go through this, what's the group? So some say it was the government because at the time we were behind in the space race, so we needed to fake this whole thing to show that we're spending all this money and that we're better than at the time the Russians as we move forward. And all of this was done in secret because nobody got to see it, and that government had that influence to do it all. And so it meets each of the definitions because then there's the event itself, and that is the lunar moon landing.
I would agree and think that is, at least in terms of venerable, that's one of the most venerable ones and one of the ones that has been around for a long time. There are times when we can look at when these conspiracy theories happen. Another one I was thinking about, which when it first came out, if you turn the clock back on time, the conspiracy theories now just seem to be everywhere, and they're part of the fabric of society. You hear them on the news, you hear them among friends and colleagues on the internet. But I remember when 9/11 happened, and there was a conspiracy theory that it was not, wasn't directed by bin Laden and the crew of Saudi hijackers, but instead it was perpetrated by none other than our own president, George Bush, and the Vice President Dick Cheney at the time.
Right.
And I can still remember some of, and they're here today, people still believe it, that the evidence that they had for it as well, jet fuel can't melt steel beams. And
Right.
people would give you this outrageous information to support those theories, but of course it turns out that indeed, with the temperatures, they were so hot, you could indeed have that melting. So
Mhm.
that's another one when I think about conspiracy theories that is very popular.
Right. And it's you're talking. We're going to go into this a little bit more, but as you talk about conspiracy theory, as you go in deeper and deeper, you'll see that it starts to take on that life of its own. And then as people are supporting it, it's not just left at this is the way it is. Then there's now evidence to quote unquote support that theory.
Yeah.
As with, and I'm thinking back to the lunar moon landings, there were certain then tracks. Why was there not dust? And there was always just this evidence that was being placed in there, almost taking the same route as the scientific discipline of inquiry of we need to ask hypothesis, gather data, make inferences. It follows that same, but on that weaker premise that there's something here, and now we've got to get all the film. It just disappeared. Another conspiracy theory was the assassination of JFK, right? And there was and then all of a sudden there was this blurred film, or why was it just enough evidence, and everything was this evidence was pointing towards it, and when it didn't, there was all of a sudden new evidence that denied that old evidence, and so it was always a moving target as that conspiracy theory moved through history.
Yeah. JFK, even Paul McCartney. Well, JFK is not dead, I've heard. Uh, Paul McCartney is dead, which is another conspiracy theory. And you're right that the evidence, so there's two ways of looking for the evidence. One way is these facts that you just described that are out
Mm-hmm.
there. But another type of evidence that you find frequently is correlational evidence. And for those of you who, just a quick recap, correlation talks about how one variable predicts another variable. You can have a perfect correlation, which would be 1.0, a perfect positive correlation, perfect negative correlation. And what happens with a lot of these conspiracy theories is you can find some events that could be correlated together, but as you know, Doug, and everyone else knows this, correlation does not imply causation.
This is
This,
not.
this oftentimes you can find this with many correlations, and people say, well, this particular thing happens, so that's just evidence about, for example, um, there's a lot of big pharma conspiracy theories out there, and one of them deals with getting skin cancer from putting on lotion.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're in the sun, and you can imagine people who are in the sun, and they put on this thing, but then they get cancer. Oh wait, these two things happen, therefore no, it's big pharma that's causing it. But just because those things happen together doesn't mean that there's any causal link.
What another example is UFOs, right? If you see things that we don't know what they are, and sometimes nobody knows what they are, that does not mean that the thing that we don't know what it is an alien meeting that definition of an unidentified flying objects happen all the time, right? That doesn't mean that it's an alien. It doesn't mean that it's little green men, or maybe it's big green men. But so then the conspiracy is that they're visiting us. The government's hiding that. I saw something. Nobody knows what it is, so that means it's a alien. No, it just means we don't know what it is right now.
Yeah. The one thing I'd like to do to wrap up this section
Okay.
is say, what's the real harm here? And this is the real harm. If we break down what conspiracy things are behaviorally, uh, when someone tells you something, in essence, what that can turn into is rule-governed behavior. And so the theory by itself isn't what causes the harm, but it's how you act. So if you buy into the theory that Big Pharma wants you to use SPF 50 to avoid cancer, and you say, oh, that's just them trying to get me, I'm not going to wear anything. I'm going to wear vegetable oil that's mixed with love, and that's going to protect me. And then you get cancer. So that's the real, and that's where this links to behavior analysis. Like, we know a lot about rule-governed behavior, and we know a lot about people acting, and it can only take one. You don't need to be contingency shaped. If you do something that's really bad for your health, you could be dead after.
And depending on who you're around, who your verbal community are, you could be getting this from multiple sources, and so now you're getting reinforced, so you are interacting with people, and it's not just, it is moving over to, you're doing a great job with this, and then they're getting pats at the back, you're in your group, then you've got, it's even further entrenched, and then you serve as an example for the next person in line as they're learning from this, and you try to sit and talk to them and explain your theories and how it's got so much data behind it. So,
yeah, I think back about the book that you and I read and talk about and used to teach our critical thinking seminar, which is Pigliucci, and he talks about AIDS denialism. And if you remember, there was that one woman who had AIDS, believed it was a Western conspiracy, literally died because she refused to take anything. And she believed it so strongly that she died from it, from her beliefs, which led to this rule, which led to action. Mm-hmm. Well, let's give an easy secret word for this first section, and that is conspiracy.
Okay, Rick, let's move on to our second section. We've defined conspiracy theories. We've given some general examples, probably, that people are aware of. Now let's bring this home. Let's bring this back to ABA. Do you have any examples for the listeners and viewers of conspiracy theories right now in applied behavior analysis?
I would say the biggest one, and just to answer that question, we're not talking about people in ABA who hold conspiracy theories, but rather conspiracy theories that affect our field. And this one is specific to our field, and of course it's outside of it, which is that vaccines cause autism. So going back to your original, you had like 3 components. One, that there was a secret group doing it. Well, the secret group in this instance is Big Pharma. They have lots of power, and they are influencing people to, they make, the way the conspiracy theory goes, they make millions of dollars based off of the vaccines, and the people that take that are just being duped, and that's the conspiracy.
It's either not working, or like you said, it's creating children with autism. Yeah.
And I can understand why this theory started off, well, if we just turn the hands back, there have always been, ever since there have been vaccines, once they were invented, there have been people who have not liked them for whatever reason. That's just part and parcel to vaccines, and people know that that's happening now with COVID, and it's certainly been around with autism. And there was a paper that was published in the Lancet that said the MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella, it contained trace amounts of thimerosal. Now, let's just put this out there. Thimerosal is mercury, and if you're getting mercury or any heavy metal in your body, it will mess you up.
Yep.
There's no scientific, like that's not a conspiracy theory, that's a fact.
That's a
And
fact.
the thought was, well, this thimerosal, if you inject that in babies, the amount is just going to tip over a lot of people. And I remember when this happened, I had, I have friends in the field, and maybe you do too, that believe in the conspiracy theory, this particular one, not a lot, but and I've always been respectful to people that have different beliefs. And there was a book at the time, and I remember when this book came out, it said, look, we now have, because the book talked about all the things I'm talking to you about, and the FDA and the pharmacy were like, okay, we're going to take out this thimerosal. So this led to a perfect opportunity to show, if this was indeed true, what would you expect the numbers, to happen? Here's your intervention line. You're right, it should go down. Guess what happened? They kept right on going up without missing a beat. Now, the people that were invested in that theory, do you think they stopped and said, you know what, this really makes me question my beliefs? They pushed the goalpost back, and there were all sorts of other number one, some people would say things like, well, it really isn't the thimerosal, it's really antifreeze that they're putting in, but they're not telling anybody about this. And then other people just flat out denied the evidence and said, well,
Right.
there's lots of people that are still dying. That evidence that you're seeing is just fake news. And that's the problem with these conspiracy theories. And I had a friend, and I asked this friend, I said, what would convince you that this conspiracy theory, the vaccines don't cause autism? And my friend said nothing. When people have that level of belief, there's no conversation that you can have.
Right.
There's no amount of evidence that you could share that ever changed their mind.
And that is not limited to autism and vaccines. That is more that notion of conspiracy theory belief. You're invested in that. And when, like you said, the goalposts move, because I can't be swayed from this belief. I need all the data point to it. Now, when data doesn't, I discard the data, and then I'm just going to keep adding new things. Yeah. So when you say that, I also think about something you asked earlier. So what are the downfalls of that, right? What do we do when we don't vaccinate, right? Because listen, it's my choice not to vaccinate my son or daughter. It's my choice.
Yep.
The problem is we had, I think it was measles, almost removed. And it's making a comeback because there's the people that can get it now. And so those decisions are not just hurting individuals, they're now hurting people across the country and in other countries. And so you see these there are real dangers when we buy into and support and believe conspiracy theories. And an interesting thing I was looking at, people that do that, it's not always about quote unquote not being smart or not being, it's still across the populace, regardless of how many years of schooling you had. That's not entirely linked to that. And so we can see really what we would consider really smart people believing certain conspiracies. They'll deny those silly ones, but they get sucked into these other ones. So it's a dangerous situation. So I probably got off task there a little bit, but
No, I'm glad you went that direction, because this is what's important, and we'll talk about this in the next segment. Believing in conspiracy theory doesn't mean you're stupid.
Right.
If you have someone who is in applied behavior analysis, in our group, we are taught the importance of data. We are taught the rigors of science. we're set up in our field to act in a certain way, to be applied scientists. And so it might be surprising when you meet someone that has a view that would seem counter to the evidence in the facts that we have. And it doesn't mean that person is stupid at all. It just means they've went down this other path and have been swayed by other sources of information. And those sources of information, unfortunately, could be a blog. It could be a group of other parents who are getting together saying, oh, I've witnessed these things and they fall in line with this, so therefore it's true. And that sways a lot of people's opinions. And when they get into these groups, then you have this echo chamber, and it's really hard to convince people otherwise.
And I don't want to bash just parents here.
Sure.
You can be a really good ABA person and do all the things you just said, but almost have a blind spot for some conspiracy theory that you can go off the rails. Now, you wouldn't accept that in these certain situations, but you can. It's like you're splitting your time. You're looking for patterns where there are none. Right? That's one of the things I noticed when we were getting ready for talking about conspiracy theories. One of the reasons we can get into conspiracy theories is we always want to look for patterns. We're always looking for pattern recognition. You look at patterns, facial expressions, things like that. But just in general, we see patterns where there's none. And we fall into traps. And then what happens is we end up going down, like you said, that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Here's the problem, too, with the vaccine hypothesis is if you look at how Big Pharma has behaved in the past, it is not at all a far leap to say you have this group that is doing some bad things. I mean, it's not just believable. We have evidence that pharma has supported or suppressed certain information that could affect their bottom line. So when you've seen that happen, it's legit, like it's no conspiracy. People have been caught red-handed, there have been fines, and people have died, people have got hurt. So I really can understand how this belief that vaccines cause autism is out there, because Big Pharma, they haven't been angels. They have done things where it's counter to public health.
Yeah, you sit there and you say, well, I've got them making these poor decisions, these criminal decisions, but they didn't promote autism through a vaccine, and that for some people is impossible. Or we look for excuses of something because we have no control, right? There's a situation that is, we've been doing everything we can do, and now my son or daughter has been diagnosed with autism. Obviously somebody is at fault for this for whatever reason, and so it's easy to get with other people, or like they did it. And so it's hard to fight that because, like you said, logic doesn't do it. Often data doesn't do it.
Right.
So you have to be very cognizant about these and what can we do about them.
Why don't you give the next secret word?
So the second secret word is vaccine.
Well done. Well, Doug, your comments nicely lead us into this next section, our last third section, and that is, personally, how do we guard against conspiracy theories? And secondly, if we have friends, family, loved ones, colleagues that may have conspiracy theories, how would we interact with them? So let's start off with, let me pose the question to you about yourself. How would you guard against, how would you share this to others in terms of advice? How would you guard against conspiracy theories?
Okay. This actually is very similar to the topic we had a few podcasts ago in understanding critical thinking, and we may have mentioned the baloney detection kit. But
Yes.
the notions here, we need to look at identify what this theory is, whether at this point it's conspiracy theory or not. Identify what it is. We need to read up on it. We need to read broadly about it. We need to ask ourselves a lot of questions about, does this person perhaps make money from the thing that they're... So you can go through and start to move that meter from, wow, this is kind of baloney, versus, hey, there's really something here. And it's not going to be, I think the hardest thing to understand about this is it's not going to be, I believe in a conspiracy theory, and then 5 seconds later, I don't believe in it. I think what happens is you need to move yourself along that needle. So, as we mentioned, right, Big Pharma's does some rough things. They've not been it's not like they're perfect. So you have to add that into asking yourself about different things. The inputs should be evaluated as well as the overall, and you determine where it stands on your meter of belief.
Yeah. That was a fabulous answer. The baloney detection kit, you're thinking like a scientist is important, but it's more than just that, because as we've learned, scientists can be bamboozled too, according to our great colleague Carl Sagan. And understanding things like, well, what's the difference between correlation and causation? I looked at all of these spurious correlations, so to speak, where you look at autism and other correlations. Did you know, if you looked at trends in cell phone usage in autism, the correlation's 0.9. But trends in organic food sales in autism is 0.99. And I just say, why would that be? I mean, you can think right away, like, I can imagine a conspiracy theory, and people have said this, well, the more cell phones that are being used, there's all of these, radiation that's going on, which is causing more. So there it's kind of, you can maybe see some plausibility. But organic food sales, why would because normally it's the opposite. Normally people will say, there's all these chemicals that are in our food that are having these insidious effects. But what you learn is, just because there are more food sales that happen across time, it's just a coincidence. It's just a correlation. More people are buying through time, and the numbers have risen for whatever reason. And there are
and then you have to and then you have to ask yourself how someone's talking to you. The big one is, don't you think there's something funny there? Well, yeah, there is, but what's look for the relationship? Well, it's just that's there. Now, what's the relationship? We're buying more organic foods since the early 2000s. We're also identifying for services a lot more children with autism since 2000s. I mean, like you said, it's more cell phone uses. If you look at the cell phone use in the 80s, there weren't any. So obviously there wouldn't be. I mean, I guess you could at some point say VCR sales were negatively correlated with it. So yes, those are the questions you ask yourself, right? Those are the questions, and it's easy, hopefully, to question yourself and to look in the mirror and ask those questions. It's way easier than the second step. And I want to hear what your thoughts on this. What happens when it's our friends, our colleagues, our family, and that they've gone down a path of a conspiracy theory that could be very harmful?
Yeah. I was doing some research on this because I had my own ideas, and I was looking for other people out there to see, what do people think about this? At this point in time, everybody knows somebody that has a conspiracy theory. And they're probably in your family, or people have heard about them. They're everywhere. And the consensus that I have and the way I like to think about it is, number one, if you're talking to someone, the very first rule is being respectful. You know, anytime you start off a conversation with, "Oh boy, that's wacky," or looking at them with that look, like, "Oh, that's really, you believe that?" Telling someone that they're stupid is never a good way to start off a conversation or to have a relationship, because immediately, once you do, you're in an adversarial relationship, you're in an adversarial conversation. And if you truly want to understand people, you really have to listen. And that may be hard if you feel very passionate against whatever that other person is telling you. If you had if you had a loved one that died of COVID, and maybe that person didn't get vaccinated, or they did get vaccinated, or whatever, and you have someone else that's like, "Oh, that's a big conspiracy theory," for whatever reason, you could have real strong emotions about that. But talking to someone, number one, is respect. Number two would be trying to give some facts. And someone talked about a truth sandwich, which is, you tell a truthful fact, here's the conspiracy theory, you tell another truthful fact, and the thought is, if you're repeating these facts, that could be a way to do it. And then the third way would be more of a Socratic type of interaction, where you're asking questions. And you were talking about the baloney detection kit, so talking to someone and asking them these questions and seeing if it has an effect. And going back to what you said earlier, I think is the bottom line, which is, when you have these conversations, you're never going to be so dynamic and just think, "Oh, I did my work, I changed this person." That's not how it works. And that, my friend, is, I think, a very valuable thing to remember when you're having these conversations. Is you need to be kind, thoughtful, respectful. You need to present information, and hopefully across time, maybe things change.
And you have to remember that while, especially as we're talking a lot of behavior analysts here, we value certain data, and we value data above many, many things. You got to remember that often this is not a academic argument that you're having with this individual. You can start spouting off data, and you may find out that that person has an answer for every bit of data, because that's what this conspiracy theory group has, and they're taught to respond to these, not taught, but the information is being shared, they can have explain through that. So you have to have, I like your notion of a Socratic, where you're posing some questions and you hope that that individual catches themselves in some logical fallacies, and that, not to be, "Ooh, I got you," but let them come on this uncomfortable moment where, wow, that really doesn't make sense, and it's not on you. You're not pushing them down that path, because we all know, and we've worked with teachers, we've worked with parents, and we've made those mistakes early in our career of, just do what I'm telling you to do and everything will be fine. That doesn't work. That doesn't even work when you're doing a really good ABA treatment. It's like you have to be able to explain and negotiate and talk. And the hardest thing is patience, like you said. Understand that you're not going to do hardly anything early in the process, and that if this person really is around you often, you're going to get another shot at this. Don't ruin them all early.
Yeah. We model our behavior, obviously we know that. And if you watch any type of, like those news where they're the political opinions, where you have a group of people, what you're seeing there is never an open, candid conversation that's even civil. It's always about the gotcha questions. It's always about showing how you're the smarter one and the other person's stupid, and you're just throwing this red meat to the base so that the people that believe and have your core set of values are going to be like, yep, that's right. And that's exactly what happens when you're talking to someone. You absolutely can't be trying to throw out the gotcha questions, because whenever you make someone feel stupid, you've already lost.
And you want to you want to shape some answers so that you begin to reinforce when they're questioning things, or when you need to be able to, you're changing a lot of learning histories. You're changing some of those reinforcement contingencies on how you respond, because as soon as you're aversive, that's all they need to do to go further back away, because they're used to being around that echo chamber in social media. They're used to being around people that are constantly telling them they're correct and they're right. So you can't fight that. They'll go back to that.
Yeah. Well, then you have inspired me to share the last secret word, which is
wow.
Truth. It's truth, Doug.
Truth. Okay, wow.
Well, this was a fun conversation, and I certainly thank all the listeners for joining us today, and we look forward to talking to you again and discussing more of these interesting topics. And I'd like to point out that we do have an email where you can share some topics that you would like us to dive into. And if you do, please do that. We're going to share, we'll put that up in our show notes. We also talked about the baloney detection kit, and we'll put a couple links up there for that. And I think that's pretty much what we covered today. So,
okay.
On behalf of my good colleague Doug Kostewicz, thank you all for joining us on ABA On Call.
Thanks for watching this episode of ABA On Call. To get your CEU, follow the link and instructions below the video. You can enjoy the program again there, or you can go straight to the attendance verification quiz. Just enter the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate.